Welcome to the shadowed world of medieval nobility, where political marriages create golden cages and forbidden love flourishes in castle corridors. In this realm of stone keeps and strategic alliances, passion and duty wage constant war behind tapestried walls. Tonight, we'll explore the intricate web of adultery that defined aristocratic life, Tussis, a world where troubadour poetry celebrates unattainable love, where ladies-in-waiting become conspirators, and where the heart's desires clash violently with feudal obligations. Medieval noble marriages were business transactions, uniting lands and bloodlines rather than hearts. Yet human nature refused to be contained by contract and duty. Courtly love emerged as both outlet and excuse, creating elaborate rituals of romantic pursuit that danced dangerously close to adultery. Eleanor of Aquitaine's courts of love, the passionate affairs of legendary figures, and the countless secret liaisons of lesser nobles created a culture where infidelity was simultaneously condemned and celebrated. So tonight, find that comfortable position and let your breathing slow as we journey into this world of forbidden desires. You're about to become a medieval lord whose world crumbles when an unexpected discovery reveals the complex network of adultery that surrounds him. Close your eyes, sink into your modern comforts, and prepare to witness a story of betrayal, passion, and the painful truths hidden within medieval castle walls. You wake to the sound of your destrier's hooves, echoing against wet cobblestones as your small party approaches your castle's gatehouse. The Scottish border campaign ended 3 days earlier than expected, a swift victory that should fill you with pride, but instead, exhaustion weighs heavily on your shoulders. Your mail hauberk clinks softly with each movement, and the familiar ache in your sword arm reminds you of the battles just concluded. The morning mist clings to your castle's walls like ghostly fingers, and something feels different about the scene before you. Where you expected bustling activity preparing for your return, an unusual stillness pervades the bailey. Your destrier snorts, sensing your tension as you dismount near the stables. The stable boy who emerges looks startled, almost guilty, stumbling over his morning greeting. "My lord, we weren't expecting you until..." Clearly, you interrupt, studying his nervous expression. Your gaze sweeps the courtyard, noting details that would normally escape attention. Fresh flowers decorate the chapel entrance, unusual for a Tuesday morning. The laundresses have hung fine linens to dry, your wife's best bed curtains among them. Most telling of all, an unfamiliar destrier stands in the guest stable, its coat gleaming from recent grooming. You hand your reins to the stammering stable boy and stride toward the great hall, your spurs ringing against stone steps worn smooth by generations of your ancestors. The hall echoes with unusual emptiness. Normally, your household would be bustling with morning activities, servants preparing the first meal, dogs fighting over scraps, children playing near the massive hearth. Instead, an almost sacred quiet fills the space. Then you hear it, laughter drifting down from the solar above. Not your wife's melodic laugh, which you've known for 12 years of marriage, but deeper, masculine laughter that makes your blood run cold. It mingles with another sound that stops your heart, the intimate, breathless laugh of a woman lost in pleasure. Your hand instinctively moves to your sword hilt as you stand frozen in your own hall, listening to your wife's adultery unfold directly above your head. The wooden beams seem to amplify every whispered word, every rustle of bedclothes, every soft gasp that confirms your worst fears. The home you've defended on countless battlefields, the wife you've fought to protect and provide for, the marriage bed you blessed with the church's holy sacraments, all violated while you bled for king and country on Scotland's treacherous borders. Time stretches like a bowstring as you listen, your mind racing through implications while your heart hammers against your ribs. Part of you wants to storm upstairs, with sword drawn, ending this betrayal in the traditional manner, blood on castle stones, honour restored through violence. Another part, the calculating lord who has survived court politics and battlefield strategies, forces you to remain still and gather intelligence before acting. The laughter fades, replaced by murmured conversation you cannot quite distinguish. Footsteps cross the solar floor, heavy boots that definitely don't belong to any of your female servants. You recognize the sound of a man dressing hastily, the clink of belt buckles and sword harnesses. Your wife's voice rises slightly, playful and affectionate in ways she hasn't spoken to you in years. As you stand in the shadows of your own great hall, eavesdropping on your wife's infidelity, the full weight of medieval marriage's contradictions crashes down upon you. The same society that demands absolute fidelity from wives celebrates the romantic adventures of knights and troubadours. The same church that condemns adultery as mortal sin created the cultural framework that makes such betrayals almost inevitable. Your breathing has become shallow, almost silent, as you strain to identify the male voice now speaking softly above. When recognition finally comes, it hits like a physical blow. Sir Geoffrey de Montfort, supposedly your ally, a knight whose family has been guests at your table countless times. The irony tastes bitter as old wine. You've shared bread and salt with the man who now shares your wife's bed. Still frozen in the shadow of your hall's great pillar, you force your racing mind to make sense of what you've discovered by examining the cultural forces that created this situation. The world of medieval nobility operates on contradictions that would drive a philosopher mad, and tonight, those contradictions have destroyed your marriage. Courtly love, that elaborate system of romantic devotion imported from Eleanor of Aquitaine's courts in France, has transformed adultery from sin into art form. You've witnessed its effects countless times without recognizing the threat it posed to your own marriage. Knights compose elaborate poems for married ladies, declaring undying love while both parties maintain the fiction that such devotion remains pure and spiritual. Ladies accept these romantic homages as their due, encouraging increasingly bold declarations while pretending innocence. Your wife, educated in Eleanor's tradition, has always loved the troubadour songs that celebrate impossible love. She collects manuscripts filled with romantic poetry, hosts evening entertainments where knights recite verses, praising feminine beauty, and presides over elaborate courtly games that blur the lines between admiration and seduction. What seemed like harmless cultural sophistication now reveals itself as systematic preparation for adultery. The morning light streaming through the hall's high windows illuminates tapestries depicting famous lovers, Lancelot and Guinevere, Tristan and Isolde, Abelard and Heloise. These images, which once seemed like mere decoration, now appear as instruction manuals for infidelity. Every story celebrates love that transgresses marriage bonds, portraying adultery as noble rebellion against cold political arrangements. You remember last winter's Christmas court, when Sir Geoffrey participated in the elaborate courtly games your wife organised. She presided over mock trials of love, where knights argued cases defending various romantic scenarios. Geoffrey presented a particularly passionate argument, defending a knight's right to serve a married lady, claiming that true love transcends human marriage laws and answers only to higher spiritual calling. At the time, you found his arguments intellectually interesting, even applauding his rhetorical skill. Now you recognize them as public declaration of intent, a bold announcement of his desires, delivered directly to his intended audience, while you sat obliviously nearby. Your wife's flushed cheeks and bright eyes during that performance weren't mere intellectual excitement, they were the visible signs of romantic awakening. The culture of courtly love creates elaborate rituals that provide perfect cover for actual adultery. Secret messages disguised as innocent poems, gifts exchanged as tokens of pure admiration, private conversations justified as spiritual counseling. Quote, every element of romantic pursuit receives cultural sanction provided it maintains appropriate pretenses. Your wife and Jeffrey have simply followed this cultural script to its logical conclusion. Even more disturbing is the realization that society actually expects and encourages these romantic pursuits. Noble ladies gain status through the number and quality of their devoted knights, while knights prove their worthiness through successful romantic conquests. A lady without devoted admirers appears lacking in feminine virtues, while a knight who fails to pursue romantic adventures seems deficient in courtly accomplishments. Your own behaviour contributed to this cultural framework without your realising it. You've praised other men's wives in flowery terms, composed occasional verses for ladies at court functions, and participated in the elaborate social dances that celebrate romantic possibility. The same cultural forces that make you an accomplished courtier have given other men license to pursue your wife. The double standard underlying courtly love becomes clear as you examine your own attitudes. You've never considered your casual affairs, the miller's daughter, the merchant's wife, various serving wenches, as betrayals of your marriage vows. Such encounters represented normal masculine privilege, no more significant than choosing wine with dinner. But your wife's affair feels like fundamental violation of natural order, a rejection of everything sacred about marriage and family honour. This masculine hypocrisy runs so deep through noble culture that you've never questioned it before. Knights celebrate their romantic conquests while demanding absolute fidelity from their wives. Troubadour poetry praises masculine pursuit of other men's wives, while treating female sexual agency as either saintly purity or demonic corruption. The same cultural system that celebrates your romantic freedom condemns identical behaviour from your wife. Standing in your hall, listening to evidence of your wife's betrayal, you finally understand the trap that medieval marriage creates for everyone involved. Political arrangements unite incompatible people, denying emotional and sexual fulfillment while creating precisely the conditions that make adultery almost inevitable. Courtly love provides the cultural framework that makes such betrayals not just possible, but practically mandatory for anyone seeking romantic satisfaction. The voices above have fallen silent, but your investigation is just beginning. Moving with the stealth learned during countless military campaigns, you begin questioning your household to uncover the elaborate network of complicity that enabled your wife's betrayal. What you discover shocks you more than the adultery itself. The systematic deception has involved virtually your entire household. Your wife's personal maid, Margaret, whom you've trusted for over a decade, breaks down under gentle questioning and reveals herself as the conspiracy's primary architect. Through tears of genuine remorse, she describes months of careful planning that went into arranging today's encounter. Every detail was orchestrated with military precision, your campaign's expected duration calculated to the day, guest chambers prepared with finest linens, meals planned for intimate dining, even the chapel scheduled for private prayers that would provide spiritual justification for the lovers' presence together. Margaret's confession reveals the sophisticated communication network that connected your wife to Sir Geoffrey across the miles, separating your estates. Messages travelled hidden in letters discussing mundane estate business, with trained servants carrying seemingly innocent correspondence that contained elaborate codes. A request for fabric samples actually requested a meeting, while discussions of hunting arrangements set dates and times for rendezvous. Your wife developed an entire secret language that allowed her to conduct her affair under your nose. The stable master, confronted with evidence of Geoffrey's unauthorized visits, admits to actively facilitating the deception. He provided fresh horses for Geoffrey's rapid travels, maintained fiction about diplomatic missions that explained his frequent presence, and even arranged alternative routes that kept him away from your most loyal retainers. Your own horses carried your wife's lover to countless secret meetings, while you remained oblivious to the betrayal being planned in your own stables. Most disturbing is discovering that your castle's chaplain, Father Benedict, has been willfully blind to obvious signs of the affair. When pressed, he admits to providing spiritual counsel to both parties separately, discussing the moral complexities of love and marriage in ways that effectively provided religious justification for their adultery. His theological sophistication allowed him to frame their relationship as spiritual devotion that transcended mere physical attraction, creating sacred space for what anyone else would recognize as simple lust. Your knights present the most painful betrayals of all. Men who have sworn personal loyalty to you, who have fought beside you and shared the brotherhood of battle, reveal themselves as active participants in your humiliation. Sir Robert, your nephew and closest companion, admits to providing alibis for Geoffrey's visits, covering for his absence from his own estates when questions arose. Sir William, whom you considered among your most trustworthy retainers, confesses to arranging hunting parties and tournaments that brought Geoffrey to your castle without arousing suspicion. The ladies-in-waiting who serve your wife have created an elaborate intelligence network that would impress the most sophisticated spy master. They maintain constant surveillance of castle comings and goings, provide early warning of your unexpected returns, and create diversions that draw attention away from suspicious activities. Their loyalty to your wife transcends their obligations to you, creating a feminine conspiracy within your own household that effectively makes you a stranger in your own home. Even your children's tutors have been compromised, creating educational excuses that explain unusual activities and justified your wife's frequent absences from normal duties. Poetry lessons provided cover for romantic correspondence, music instruction explained extended private sessions with Geoffrey, and religious education justified extended conversations about matters of the heart. Your children's education became a smokescreen for their mother's adultery. Your household servants reveal the extent of their knowledge with shocking casualness, as if your wife's affair was common knowledge that only you were too blind to see. The cook describes preparing elaborate private meals for two, complete with aphrodisiac foods and expensive wines. The laundresses detail washing bloodstains from bedclothes, not from monthly cycles, but from the violent passion that marked your wife's encounters with her lover. Even the pantry keeper admits to providing special supplies for romantic picnics, arranged in secluded locations throughout your estate. The economic cost of this conspiracy staggers you as details emerge. Your wife has been systematically looting your household treasury to fund her affair, providing Geoffrey with expensive gifts that include jewellery, fine clothing, weapons, and even horses from your own stable. The household accounts, which you trusted to others while focusing on military and political duties, reveal months of mysterious expenses that funded romantic trysts while you campaigned for king and country. Your steward's reluctant confession provides the final insult, end quote. He has been actively managing the affair's logistics, arranging finances, scheduling activities, and coordinating the complex deceptions required to maintain secrecy. The same administrative skills you've relied on to manage your estate have been turned against you. creating a parallel household structure dedicated to facilitating your wife's betrayal. The scope of the conspiracy makes clear that this affair represents far more than simple romantic indiscretion. Your wife has effectively established a shadow court within your own castle, complete with loyal retainers, dedicated servants, and elaborate protocols that rival anything at the royal court. She has demonstrated political and organizational skills that would make her an effective ruler in her own right, using those abilities to systematically deceive and humiliate you. Standing in your own great hall, surrounded by servants who have participated in this elaborate betrayal, you realize that discovering your wife's adultery is only the beginning of a much larger problem. You face not just personal humiliation, but the complete breakdown of the loyalty and trust that holds medieval households together. Every person you've relied on has proven themselves capable of fundamental deception, raising questions about your ability to govern effectively when your own family has successfully conspired against you for months. Retreating to your private solar with your steward's account rolls, you begin calculating the devastating financial impact of your wife's betrayal. Medieval adultery, you discover, operates through complex economic networks that rival legitimate trade arrangements, and your household has been systematically plundered to fund romantic fantasy. The account books reveal expenditures that should have raised immediate suspicions had you been present to review them personally. Your wife has been purchasing expensive gifts for Geoffrey that represent months of estate income, a destrier worth 20 marks, custom-made armour decorated with precious metals, silk clothing imported from Constantinople, illuminated manuscripts that cost more than most nobles earn in a year. Each gift represents not just personal betrayal, but substantial economic damage to your family's wealth. Your estate's jewellery collection, accumulated over generations and intended as dowry for your daughter, has been systematically looted to provide romantic tokens. Family heirlooms passed down through 5 generations now decorate your wife's lover, converting irreplaceable ancestral wealth into personal gratification. The ruby brooch that belonged to your grandmother, the golden torque that marked your grandfather's service to the king, even the blessed silver cross that provided spiritual protection during the Crusades, all transformed into love gifts for a man who has systematically destroyed your honour. The fabric accounts reveal your wife's elaborate wardrobe expansion, designed specifically to attract and maintain Geoffrey's attention. She has commissioned dozens of new gowns in the latest French fashions, using silks and furs that cost more than most knights' annual income. Her personal spending has doubled over the past year, creating a financial drain that would have bankrupted lesser estates. Every garment represents calculated investment in maintaining her lover's interest, while depleting your family's resources. Your wine cellars have been systematically depleted to provide appropriate refreshments for romantic encounters. The finest vintages, reserved for entertaining royal guests and celebrating religious festivals, have been consumed in private trysts that mocked every sacred occasion they should have honoured. Your steward's records show elaborate private meals, featuring delicacies imported from across Europe, Mediterranean spices, French cheeses, English ales, creating a level of luxury that exceeds even royal households. The stable accounts reveal another layer of financial betrayal, as your wife has been providing Geoffrey with horses from your own breeding program. The destriers you've spent years developing for military campaigns have been gifted to your enemy, along with breeding mares that represent decades of careful bloodline development. Your stable, once renowned throughout the region for producing superior warhorses, has been diminished to satisfy your wife's romantic generosity. Your castle's guest chambers have been systematically upgraded to accommodate Geoffrey's extended visits, with expenditures that rival preparations for royal progresses. New tapestries depicting romantic scenes, imported furniture designed for intimate entertaining, even religious artifacts blessed by bishops, all purchased to create appropriate settings for adultery, while you campaigned for God and King in hostile territory. The household account for personal servants reveals that your wife has been maintaining what amounts to a separate court dedicated to serving her affair. She has hired additional ladies-in-waiting, specifically to facilitate secret communications, employed musicians to provide romantic entertainment during private encounters, even commissioned a scribe to create elaborate love letters when her own writing skills proved inadequate for Geoffrey's sophisticated tastes. Your armory accounts show the most personally insulting expenditures of all. Your wife has been purchasing weapons and armor for Geoffrey using funds from your own military budget. The man who has dishonored your marriage has been equipped for battle using resources intended to defend your family's honor. Every sword stroke he makes in future conflicts will be powered by steel purchased with your money and blessed with your family's prayers. The religious accounts reveal systematic abuse of funds intended for spiritual purposes, as your wife has been making substantial donations to churches and monasteries in Geoffrey's name. Your family's eternal salvation has been compromised to purchase spiritual merit for your wife's lover, converting sacred obligations into romantic gestures that mock every religious principle you've fought to defend. Your daughter's dowry fund, carefully accumulated over 16 years to ensure her successful marriage, has been systematically raided to finance your wife's affair. The gold and silver, intended to secure your child's future happiness, has instead funded her mother's current pleasure, destroying carefully laid plans that took decades to develop. Your daughter will enter the marriage market impoverished because her mother chose romantic gratification over family responsibility. The estate improvement funds, intended for castle fortifications and agricultural development that would benefit generations of your descendants, have been diverted to create romantic settings for temporary pleasure. Defensive walls remain unfinished, while garden pavilions provide private meeting places. Agricultural equipment rusts, while expensive perfumes create appropriate atmosphere for seduction. Standing in your solar, surrounded by evidence of systematic financial betrayal, you realize that your wife's adultery represents more than personal humiliation. It constitutes wholesale theft of your family's accumulated wealth and future security. The economic damage may prove more devastating than any military defeat you've suffered, because it strikes at the foundation of everything you've worked to build and preserve. The account books make clear that recovery will require years of careful management and probably decades of reduced circumstances. Your family's lifestyle will need dramatic adjustment. Your military equipment requires updating at personal expense. Your political influence will diminish as your reduced wealth limits your ability to maintain appropriate hospitality and gift-giving. Your wife's romantic adventure has effectively impoverished your entire lineage while enriching your enemies. As the afternoon sun streams through your solar's windows, casting long shadows across the scattered account rolls, you're forced to confront the fundamental hypocrisy that underlies your rage at your wife's betrayal. The same masculine culture that grants you unlimited sexual freedom condemns identical behavior from your wife as unforgivable violation of natural order. Your own sexual history, when examined honestly, reveals systematic infidelity that began within months of your marriage. The miller's daughter, a willing participant in what you considered harmless dalliance, provided regular sexual satisfaction during your wife's pregnancies and recoveries. You felt no guilt about these encounters, viewing them as natural, masculine privilege that had nothing to do with your marriage obligations. The girl's eventual pregnancy and your provision for the resulting bastard seemed generous rather than responsible, a demonstration of noble magnanimity rather than acknowledgement of adultery. The merchant's wife in the neighbouring town represented a more sophisticated affair, lasting several years and involving genuine emotional attachment alongside physical pleasure. You exchanged gifts with her, wrote occasional poems celebrating her beauty, and arranged business dealings specifically to create opportunities for romantic encounters. When her husband discovered the relationship, you felt irritated by his possessiveness rather than guilty about your behaviour. The subsequent duel, which you won easily, seemed like appropriate punishment for his unreasonable jealousy rather than justified defence of his honour. Your military campaigns provided countless opportunities for sexual adventure that you never considered problematic. Serving wenches in castles throughout Scotland offered willing companionship that helped pass long winter nights during extended sieges. Camp followers who serviced armies created temporary relationships that provided comfort and pleasure without emotional complication. Even captured noblewomen occasionally became willing partners when treated with appropriate courtesy and generosity. These encounters, numbering in the dozens over 12 years of marriage, never felt like betrayals of your wedding vows, because medieval masculine culture treats male sexuality as fundamentally different from female sexuality. Men require multiple sexual outlets to maintain physical and mental health, while women supposedly find complete satisfaction through marriage and motherhood. Your extramarital activities represented normal biological function, like eating when hungry or sleeping when tired. The Church's teaching on adultery, which you now find so relevant to your wife's behaviour, never seemed applicable to your own conduct. Priests who condemn adultery as mortal sin somehow understand that masculine sexuality operates under different spiritual laws than feminine sexuality. Your confessions never included detailed accounts of extramarital encounters, because both you and your confessors understood that such activities fell into different categories than adultery proper. Your peers, the knights and nobles who form your social circle, have always celebrated masculine sexual conquest while demanding absolute feminine fidelity. Evening conversations in great halls across England include boasting about seduced wives, conquered maidens, and willing wenches, with each story receiving approving laughter rather than moral condemnation. The same men who trade these tales would kill any knight discovered with their own wives, seeing no contradiction in this double standard. The legal framework supporting medieval marriage reflects these masculine assumptions about sexuality and fidelity. Your wife's adultery provides grounds for annulment, forfeiture of dower rights, and potentially even execution, while your own extramarital activities have never threatened your marriage or property rights. The law assumes that feminine adultery corrupts bloodlines and property inheritance, while masculine adultery represents natural expression of superior sexual nature. Your wife's education, which seemed like sophisticated preparation for noble marriage, actually created expectations that medieval marriage cannot fulfill. She learned about romantic love through troubadour poetry, developed appreciation for masculine beauty through artistic exposure, and formed ideas about emotional intimacy that political marriage arrangements cannot satisfy. Her affair with Geoffrey represents pursuit of romantic ideals that her cultural education taught her to value, while her marriage denies her any opportunity to experience. The cultural framework that celebrates courtly love creates systematic encouragement for exactly the kind of romantic pursuit that Geoffrey has practiced with your wife. Knights gain status through successful romantic adventures. Ladies acquire prestige through devoted admirers, and society as a whole treats these elaborate mating dances as sophisticated entertainment rather than dangerous threats to marital stability. Your wife and Geoffrey have simply followed cultural scripts to their logical conclusion. Your rage at Geoffrey focuses on his violation of masculine codes regarding territorial rights rather than moral outrage about adultery itself. He has trespassed on your property, not committed sin against divine law. The offence feels like theft rather than moral corruption, a practical violation of social contracts rather than spiritual betrayal of sacred vows. Your desire for vengeance seeks restoration of honour rather than punishment for sin. The contradiction becomes even more apparent when you consider your own emotional relationship with your wife over 12 years of marriage. You've provided material comfort, physical protection, and social status, while demanding domestic management, sexual availability, and childbearing in return. Love, in the romantic sense celebrated by troubadour poetry, never entered into your practical arrangements. You've been a competent husband by medieval standards, while never attempting to become a romantic partner. Your wife's affair with Geoffrey may represent her first experience of the kind of romantic love that her cultural education taught her to expect from life. The passionate intensity that you heard in her laughter this morning may be completely new to her, an emotional awakening that your practical marriage never provided. Her betrayal might stem from romantic starvation rather than moral corruption, a desperate attempt to experience the kind of love that society celebrates while marriage denies. Standing in your solar, surrounded by evidence of financial and emotional betrayal, you begin to understand that your wife's adultery represents systematic failure of medieval marriage arrangements rather than personal moral collapse. The same cultural forces that celebrate masculine sexual freedom create female romantic expectations that political marriages cannot fulfill, making adultery almost inevitable for anyone seeking emotional satisfaction within noble society's contradictory framework. As evening approaches, you find yourself examining illuminated manuscripts in your wife's collection, seeking to understand the cultural forces that shaped her romantic expectations. The books tell a story of systematic feminine rebellion against medieval marriage's constraints, led by the most powerful woman of the age, Eleanor of Aquitaine, whose influence on noble culture created the framework that made your wife's adultery almost inevitable. Eleanor's revolutionary approach to marriage and sexuality transformed noble culture across Europe through her establishment of courts of love that challenged fundamental assumptions about feminine nature and marital obligations. As Queen of France, and later Queen of England, she possessed unprecedented power to reshape cultural attitudes toward romance, creating new models of feminine behavior that celebrated women's romantic agency rather than merely their reproductive function. Your wife's manuscript collection includes several treatises on courtly love derived directly from Eleanor's courts, including Andreas Capellanus's The Art of Courtly Love, which explicitly argues that true love cannot exist within marriage, because married couples have already surrendered their romantic freedom through legal and economic contracts. This text, which your wife has obviously studied carefully, provides systematic justification for adultery by claiming that authentic romantic love requires the freedom to choose that marriage eliminates. Eleanor's own romantic history, legendary throughout Europe, provides the template that your wife has followed in her affair with Geoffrey. Eleanor's rumoured relationship with her uncle Raymond of Antioch during the Second Crusade, her open conflicts with her first husband Louis VII over his failure to provide romantic satisfaction, and her later passionate marriage to Henry II of England, all demonstrate feminine romantic agency that medieval marriage typically denies. Your wife has simply followed Eleanor's example by pursuing romantic fulfillment outside the constraints of political marriage. The manuscript illustrations in your wife's collection celebrate famous love affairs that violated marriage bonds: Lancelot and Guinevere, Tristan and Isolde, Abelard and Heloise, presenting adultery as the highest form of romantic expression rather than moral failure. These stories, promoted through Eleanor's patronage and now beloved throughout noble culture, systematically undermine marriage's religious and legal foundations by suggesting that authentic love transcends human law and answers only to higher spiritual calling. Eleanor's establishment of feminine courts that judged romantic disputes created new legal frameworks that compete with church and secular law regarding marriage and sexuality. These courts, presided over by powerful ladies and guided by elaborate codes of romantic conduct, provide alternative authority structures that legitimize behaviors traditional law condemns. Your wife has effectively appealed to Eleanor's romantic jurisdiction rather than accepting traditional marital obligations. The troubadour tradition that Eleanor patronized throughout her career created professional romantic literature that celebrates masculine pursuit of married women while portraying husbands as obstacles to true love rather than legitimate authority figures. Your wife's collection includes dozens of poems that present husbands as elderly, crude, or simply inadequate romantic partners whose claims on their wives' affections deserve no respect when superior lovers appear. You have been cast in the literary role of the blocking figure whose removal enables romantic fulfillment. Eleanor's influence extended beyond literature and law to create new fashions and social customs that facilitated romantic relationships outside marriage. The elaborate courtly ceremonies, intimate musical entertainments, and sophisticated gift exchanges that characterize modern noble culture all derive from Eleanor's innovations designed to create appropriate settings for romantic pursuit. Your wife's affair with Geoffrey has followed these cultural protocols exactly, suggesting systematic preparation rather than spontaneous passion. The educational innovations that Eleanor promoted for noble daughters, emphasizing literacy, artistic appreciation, and intellectual sophistication, created women capable of conducting elaborate romantic relationships that require considerable skill and knowledge. Your wife's ability to compose coded love letters, arrange complex logistical deceptions, and maintain sophisticated emotional relationships reflects the kind of advanced education that Eleanor made available to noblewomen throughout Europe. Eleanor's political career demonstrated that women could exercise authority and make independent decisions in ways that traditional marriage law denies. Her management of vast territories, her leadership of the Second Crusade, her sophisticated diplomatic relationships with powerful men throughout Europe all provided examples of feminine capability that marriage's legal frameworks systematically suppress. Your wife's successful management of her elaborate affair demonstrates similar administrative and political skills applied to romantic rather than governmental purposes. The religious innovations promoted through Eleanor's influence, particularly the elevation of the Virgin Mary as romantic ideal, and the development of mystical love traditions that blur boundaries between sacred and secular passion, provided spiritual justification for romantic relationships that transcend marriage bonds. Your wife's collection includes devotional literature that presents romantic love as path to divine understanding, suggesting that her affair with Geoffrey serves spiritual purposes that marriage cannot fulfill. Eleanor's own children, particularly her daughters Marie de Champagne and Alix de Blois, continued her revolutionary approach to marriage and romance by establishing their own courts of love and patronizing romantic literature that further undermined traditional marital authority. The cultural movement that Eleanor initiated has gained momentum across generations, creating systematic challenge to medieval marriage that your wife's affair represents rather than initiates. Your wife's behavior, viewed through Eleanor's cultural influence, represents participation in a continent-wide feminine rebellion against marriage's constraints rather than personal moral failure. She has joined a sophisticated movement that includes queens, duchesses, and countless noble ladies who refuse to accept that political marriage arrangements must eliminate romantic possibility. Her affair with Geoffrey connects her to a network of women pursuing similar romantic freedoms across Europe. Standing in your wife's solar, surrounded by manuscripts that celebrate romantic love and feminine agency, you begin to understand that her betrayal represents far more than personal choice. It reflects systematic cultural change that challenges fundamental assumptions about marriage, authority, and feminine nature that have governed noble society for centuries. Eleanor of Aquitaine's revolution continues through women like your wife, making individual resistance part of broader historical transformation. As dusk settles over your castle, you examine the physical evidence of your wife's elaborate communication network with growing amazement at its sophistication. Medieval adultery, you discover, requires intelligence networks that rival diplomatic services, with codes, dead drops, and courier systems that would impress the most experienced spy master. Your wife's writing desk reveals the first layer of her deception, a collection of seemingly innocent correspondence that conceals passionate love letters through elaborate encoding systems. Business letters discussing wool prices contain hidden messages about meeting arrangements with specific numerical codes indicating dates and times. A mundane request for fabric samples actually represents desperate plea for Geoffrey's attention, while routine estate management discussions conceal detailed descriptions of romantic longing that would shame professional poets. The encoding system itself demonstrates remarkable sophistication, using techniques that suggest either extensive education or consultation with trained scribes familiar with diplomatic correspondence. Every third word in business paragraphs, when read in sequence, creates passionate love poetry that celebrates Geoffrey's masculine virtues and your wife's romantic devotion. Mathematical calculations, supposedly relating to agricultural yields, actually represent days since last meetings and count down to future encounters. Your wife's prayer book contains the most elaborate deceptions of all, with romantic messages hidden within religious texts through systems of marginal notation and selective emphasis. Sacred psalms become vehicles for secular passion through careful marking of specific words and phrases that, when combined, create declarations of love more passionate than anything in your marriage bed. Religious festivals, marked in the calendar, actually indicate planned trysts, with saints' feast days providing perfect cover for romantic celebrations. The household account books reveal another layer of coded communication, with expenses itemized in ways that convey romantic messages alongside practical information. Purchase orders for household supplies include quantities and specifications that spell out meeting locations when decoded properly. Wine orders specify vintages that correspond to Geoffrey's preferences, while fabric purchases indicate your wife's clothing plans for upcoming encounters. Even mundane entries for candles and firewood contain romantic significance when properly interpreted. Your castle's chapel contains evidence of religious communication systems that mock every sacred tradition while facilitating adultery. Your wife and Geoffrey have been leaving messages for each other in prayer books, using specific psalms as mailboxes for romantic correspondence. Votive candles positioned in particular patterns indicate availability for meetings, while flower arrangements at various altars convey emotional states and romantic desires. They have transformed sacred space into elaborate postal system for conducting their affair. The servant network that enables this communication system operates with military precision and absolute loyalty that surpasses anything you've achieved with your own retainers. Margaret, your wife's personal maid, serves as primary intelligence coordinator, maintaining surveillance of castle activities while managing information flow between the lovers. She has developed relationships with servants throughout Geoffrey's estate, creating communication links that span the countryside through trusted intermediaries. Your wife's ladies-in-waiting function as specialized intelligence operatives with specific responsibilities within the conspiracy. Lady Catherine manages external communications, coordinating with Geoffrey's household to arrange meetings and exchange messages. Lady Anne handles internal security, watching for threats to the affair's secrecy while creating alibis and explanations for suspicious activities. Lady Isabel serves as cultural advisor, helping compose appropriate poetry and selecting suitable gifts that maintain Geoffrey's romantic interest. The stable network provides perhaps the most sophisticated element of the entire system, with horses and riders moving constantly between estates carrying messages disguised as routine business correspondence. Your own horses have been used to transport love letters that mock your military service while facilitating your personal betrayal. Stable boys at multiple locations serve as postal workers in an adultery network that spans several counties and involves dozens of participants. Your wife has even corrupted visiting merchants and travelling craftsmen to serve her romantic conspiracy, using their regular business activities as cover for message delivery and intelligence gathering. The cloth merchant who visits quarterly carries more than fabric samples. He transports passionate love letters and detailed reports about Geoffrey's activities. The goldsmith who creates your wife's jewellery also crafts romantic gifts for her lover while gathering intelligence about his romantic preferences and financial situation. The seasonal cycle of medieval life provides natural cover for the communication system, with religious festivals, agricultural activities, and social obligations creating predictable opportunities for message exchange. Harvest celebrations bring estates together for shared activities that facilitate face-to-face meetings, while religious pilgrimages provide excuses for extended travel that allows private encounters away from familiar surveillance. Your wife's collection of romantic literature serves dual purposes as both entertainment and communication manual, with specific texts providing agreed-upon reference points for coded messages. When she mentions particular poems in seemingly casual conversation, she's actually referencing predetermined signals that convey complex information about availability, emotional state, and meeting arrangements. The literary culture that seemed like sophisticated refinement actually functions as elaborate espionage toolkit. The discovery of this communication network's sophistication forces you to reassess your wife's intelligence and capabilities in ways that both impress and terrify you. The woman you considered a decorative addition to your household has demonstrated organizational skills that rival your military planning abilities. Her successful management of this elaborate deception suggests political and strategic talents that could make her a formidable enemy if your marriage dissolves into open warfare. Unable to sleep, you pace your solar while analyzing your rival with the same strategic thinking you apply to military enemies. Geoffrey de Montfort represents everything that medieval courtly culture celebrates in masculine beauty and romantic accomplishment, making him the perfect opponent to destroy your marriage while enhancing his own reputation. At 28, Geoffrey possesses the physical advantages that tournament culture prizes above all other masculine virtues. His victories in tournaments across France and England have established his reputation as one of the finest knights of your generation, with combat skills that make him genuinely dangerous in both formal duels and battlefield encounters. Your wife's choice of lover demonstrates sophisticated understanding of masculine hierarchy she has selected, a man whose physical prowess matches his romantic reputation. Geoffrey's family connections provide him with political advantages that make him attractive to ambitious women seeking to advance their social positions. As younger son of the Earl of Leicester, he possesses noble blood and court access without the responsibilities that burden eldest sons destined for inheritance. This freedom allows him to pursue romantic adventures that more heavily burdened nobles cannot afford, making him available for the kind of elaborate courtship that your wife's affair required. His education, completed at the University of Paris before pursuing knightly training, gives him cultural sophistication that surpasses most military men of your generation. Geoffrey composes poetry that rivals professional troubadours, speaks fluent French and Latin alongside English, and demonstrates knowledge of classical literature that allows him to conduct intellectual conversations that transcend mere physical attraction. Your wife's affair involves her mind as well as her body, creating emotional connections that pure physical relationships cannot match. Geoffrey's financial situation, while not matching your landed wealth, provides sufficient resources to maintain the elaborate gift-giving that courtly love requires, while avoiding the financial responsibilities that limit your romantic spending. His income from tournament prizes, military service, and generous patrons allows him to purchase expensive presents and fund elaborate entertainments without depleting family resources or compromising future obligations. He can afford romance in ways that married men with estates and children cannot. His reputation among noble ladies throughout England and France suggests systematic romantic experience that prepared him perfectly for seducing your wife. Geoffrey has conducted successful affairs with several prominent married women, gaining knowledge about feminine psychology and romantic technique that inexperienced knights lack. Your wife represents another conquest in a career of romantic adventures that have educated him in precisely the skills needed to destroy stable marriages. Geoffrey's military service provides him with extended periods away from his own estate that create perfect opportunities for conducting affairs without arousing suspicion from his own household. His participation in tournaments, military campaigns, and diplomatic missions gives him legitimate reasons for travelling throughout England while maintaining secrecy about his actual destinations and activities. The same mobility that makes him valuable as a knight makes him dangerous as a romantic rival. His unmarried status eliminates the complications that would arise if he were conducting parallel deceptions with his own wife, allowing him to focus entirely on your wife's seduction without managing competing romantic obligations. Geoffrey can dedicate unlimited time and emotional energy to winning your wife's affections, while you must balance military service, estate management, political obligations, and family responsibilities that prevent you from providing similar romantic attention. The cultural framework that celebrates knightly romance treats Geoffrey's pursuit of your wife as admirable demonstration of courtly virtue rather than criminal adultery. His romantic poetry, elaborate courtship rituals, and passionate devotion receive social approval that encourages continued pursuit rather than moral condemnation. Society rewards his romantic success while condemning your failure to prevent it, creating systematic bias in his favour. Geoffrey's youth gives him physical advantages that become more pronounced as the affair continues over months of elaborate courtship and passionate encounters. While you bear the accumulated injuries and exhaustion of military campaigns, political stress, and administrative responsibilities, he maintains the vigour and energy that extended romantic relationships require. Your wife's affair benefits from masculine vitality that your married obligations have gradually depleted. His freedom from the domestic responsibilities that constrain your behavior allows Geoffrey to maintain mysterious allure that married men cannot sustain once wives become familiar with their daily habits, personal weaknesses, and mundane concerns. Your wife knows you too well to maintain romantic illusions, while Geoffrey remains enough of a stranger to preserve the fantasy that courtly love requires for emotional sustainability. The tournament culture that celebrates Geoffrey's achievements creates regular opportunities for public display of his physical abilities and romantic desirability that reinforced your wife's attraction while publicly humiliating you through comparison. His victories in combat competitions demonstrate masculine superiority that courtly culture translates directly into romantic attractiveness, making every tournament appearance an advertisement for his desirability as a lover. Geoffrey's strategic intelligence, demonstrated through his successful military and romantic careers, suggests that his pursuit of your wife involves careful calculation rather than impulsive passion. He has likely evaluated the political and economic advantages that an affair with your wife might provide, including potential access to your wealth, influence with your political allies, and intelligence about your military and business activities. Your wife's romantic fulfillment may be secondary to his strategic objectives. Standing in your darkened solar, you realize that Geoffrey represents systematic threat to everything you've built because he possesses advantages that medieval culture values above the domestic virtues that marriage requires. He embodies romantic ideals that your practical marriage cannot compete with, making your wife's attraction to him almost inevitable, given the cultural forces that shaped her romantic expectations. The weight of your children's future presses down upon you as you consider how your wife's adultery will affect their lives, inheritance rights, and marriage prospects. In your darkened chamber, lit only by flickering candles, you examine the devastating consequences that adult romantic failures impose on innocent children who had no voice in creating the family crisis that now threatens their entire future. Your eldest son, William, now 14 and on the verge of knighthood, represents your primary concern because his legitimacy directly affects the inheritance of your titles, lands, and political obligations. Medieval law's harsh treatment of adultery means that proven infidelity by his mother could raise questions about his paternity that would destroy his claim to everything you've worked to build and preserve. Even unfounded suspicions could damage his reputation sufficiently to block his intended marriage to the Earl of Warwick's daughter, an alliance that took 5 years of careful negotiation to arrange. William's knightly training, scheduled to continue with Sir Edmund of Cornwall, faces potential disruption if scandal surrounds your family name. Noble families carefully choose their sons' mentors based on reputation and social standing, and adultery accusations could make your son unwelcome in the most prestigious households where he should be completing his education. His romantic future also hangs in the balance, as noble families will hesitate to betroth their daughters to young men whose mother's behaviour suggests possible hereditary moral weakness. Your daughter Margaret, now 12 and approaching marriageable age, faces even more devastating consequences because medieval society judges women more harshly for their mother's sexual behaviour than it judges men for their father's romantic adventures. Her carefully planned betrothal to Lord Robert's heir could be cancelled if your wife's adultery becomes public knowledge, destroying years of diplomatic effort while leaving Margaret vulnerable to less advantageous matches, with families desperate enough to overlook scandal in exchange for reduced dowry payments. Margaret's education, currently supervised by her mother and focused on the domestic and cultural skills that noble wives require, has been compromised by association with adultery that calls into question everything your wife might teach about feminine virtue and marital obligations. Future mothers-in-law will scrutinize Margaret's behavior for signs of her mother's moral weaknesses, making her courtship period a probationary examination rather than celebration of her virtues and accomplishments. Your youngest son, Thomas, only 8 years old, faces the cruelest fate of all because his birth date falls within the period when your wife's affair was most active, raising questions about his paternity that could exclude him from inheritance entirely. The Church's willingness to investigate bloodlines when substantial property is involved means that Thomas could spend his entire life defending his legitimacy while his older siblings enjoy unquestioned acceptance of their inheritance rights. The household atmosphere that has shaped your children's understanding of marriage and family relationships has been fundamentally corrupted by the systematic deception required to maintain your wife's affair. They have grown up watching their mother lie with practiced ease, seeing servants participate in elaborate conspiracies, and absorbing lessons about loyalty and honesty that contradict everything you believed you were teaching them about honor and virtue. Your children's relationship with their mother faces inevitable damage regardless of how you choose to handle this crisis, because they will eventually learn about her betrayal through household gossip, even if you attempt to maintain secrecy. Their ability to trust feminine authority, respect maternal guidance, and form healthy romantic relationships in their own futures will be compromised by discovering that their primary female role model systematically deceived their father while corrupting everyone around her. The extended family relationships that provide crucial support networks for noble children have already been damaged by your wife's affair, as her conspiracy involved relatives and family friends whose loyalties are now questionable. Your children's uncles, aunts, cousins, and family friends may have known about the adultery while maintaining false relationships with you, creating an atmosphere of suspicion that will poison family gatherings and social occasions for years to come. Your children's religious education, fundamental to their moral development and spiritual welfare, has been compromised by witnessing adults use sacred spaces and religious observances to facilitate adultery. They have watched their mother receive communion while living in mortal sin, seen priests provide spiritual counsel that enabled adultery, and absorbed lessons about religious authority that will complicate their own faith development throughout their lives. The financial resources intended to secure your children's futures have been systematically diverted to fund your wife's romantic adventures, requiring difficult choices about their education, dowries, and inheritance that will limit their opportunities for advantageous marriages and successful careers. Your daughter's dowry has been depleted to purchase gifts for Geoffrey, while your son's equipment and training funds have been redirected to support elaborate romantic entertainments. Your children's social relationships with other noble families have been compromised by their mother's behavior, as parents will hesitate to encourage friendships that might expose their own children to moral corruption or social scandal. Playmates and companions who should provide lifelong friendships and political alliances may be forbidden by their parents from maintaining close relationships with children whose family stability has been destroyed by adultery. The political alliances that should benefit your children throughout their careers face potential dissolution if your marriage crisis becomes public knowledge, as other noble families will distance themselves from scandal that might threaten their own reputations. Treaties, trade agreements, and military alliances, carefully constructed over decades could collapse, leaving your children politically isolated when they most need powerful allies to establish their own careers. Standing in your darkened chamber, watching shadows dance across portraits of your ancestors, you realize that your children represent the most compelling reason to handle this crisis with strategic wisdom rather than emotional revenge. Their futures depend on decisions you make in the coming days, and their welfare must take precedence over your wounded pride or desire for personal satisfaction. The innocent victims of your wife's adultery deserve protection, even if their mother does not. Deep into the night, you find yourself in the castle's lower levels, speaking quietly with servants whose perspective on your wife's adultery reveals dimensions of the crisis that noble viewpoints cannot capture. The people who empty chamber pots, wash blood-stained linens, and clean up after romantic encounters possess intimate knowledge of adultery's reality that contrasts sharply with courtly love's romantic idealization. Margaret, your wife's longtime personal maid, breaks down completely when confronted privately about her role in facilitating the affair. Through her tears, she reveals the moral anguish that serving adultery created for a woman whose own marriage represents genuine love and mutual respect. She describes the growing revulsion she felt while cleaning up after encounters that mocked everything sacred about marriage. Yet, her economic dependence on your wife's favor prevented her from refusing participation in activities that violated her deepest beliefs. Her testimony reveals that servants possess far more accurate understanding of adultery's emotional and physical reality than the romantic literature would suggest. She witnessed your wife's post-encounter emotional states, the guilt, anxiety, and growing desperation that passionate poetry never mentions. The elaborate romantic encounters that seemed so glamorous in planning often ended with your wife in tears, questioning her choices while begging Margaret to help her find ways to end the relationship without losing Geoffrey's affections entirely. The stable master, when pressed about his role in facilitating Geoffrey's secret visits, provides perspective on adultery's impact on household loyalty that illuminates fundamental problems with medieval social structure. His primary allegiance should be to you as lord and master, but your extended absences on military campaigns left him dependent on your wife's daily authority for practical direction and financial support. Servants cannot maintain theoretical loyalty to absent masters when present mistresses control their daily survival and working conditions. His account reveals the systematic corruption that adultery introduces into household relationships, as servants must choose between competing loyalties while managing increasingly complex deceptions that compromise their own moral integrity. Men and women who pride themselves on honest work find themselves participating in elaborate lies that make them accomplices to behavior they privately condemn, while publicly facilitate for economic survival. The kitchen staff's perspective on preparing elaborate romantic meals provides disturbing insights into adultery's waste and excess that contrast with medieval society's general scarcity and careful resource management. The cook describes feeling personally violated when asked to prepare aphrodisiac dishes and elaborate feasts for romantic encounters, while castle families in surrounding villages struggled with harvest failures and food shortages caused by weather that ruined crops throughout the region. Their testimony reveals that servants often possess stronger moral convictions about marriage and fidelity than their noble employers, drawing on religious training and personal experiences that make adultery appear as sin rather than sophisticated entertainment. The same church teaching that nobles manipulate to justify romantic adventures provides servants with clear guidance about right and wrong that makes their participation in adultery genuinely torturous for people trying to live according to Christian principles. The laundresses who handle physical evidence of romantic encounters describe the revolting reality behind courtly love's elegant facade in terms that would destroy any romantic illusions about adultery's nature. Blood, semen, and other bodily fluids that must be cleaned from expensive linens tell stories about passion that contrast sharply with troubadour poetry's ethereal descriptions of spiritual love that transcends physical desire. Their work reveals adultery's impact on women's bodies in ways that romantic literature never acknowledges, including injuries, infections, and pregnancy risks that create medical emergencies requiring discreet handling by servants who lack proper training or resources to manage serious health problems. Your wife's romantic adventures have created medical crises that could have killed her while her lovers remained oblivious to physical consequences of their passionate encounters. The household guards assigned to maintain castle security reveal their moral confusion about protecting a lady who systematically violates the honor they're sworn to defend. Their oath requires them to protect your wife's physical safety while maintaining your family's reputation. But her adultery creates impossible contradictions between these obligations. They must facilitate activities that destroy your honor while pretending to defend your interests, creating psychological stress that undermines their effectiveness as protectors. Their perspective illuminates fundamental problems with feudal loyalty when personal behavior conflicts with social responsibilities. As men trained for warfare find themselves managing domestic crises that require diplomatic skills they never developed. Medieval military culture provides no guidance for handling situations where their lord's wife becomes the primary threat to everything they're supposed to protect. The castle's chaplain, Father Benedict, represents the most tragic example of corruption that adultery introduces into household relationships, as his spiritual authority has been systematically undermined by his participation in activities that contradict his religious vows and training. His private confession reveals years of moral anguish about providing religious justification for behavior he knows violates church teaching, while his economic dependence on your family's support prevents him from taking stands that might end the affair. His testimony exposes the fundamental conflict between religious ideals and practical survival that adultery creates for people trying to maintain spiritual integrity while serving masters whose behavior violates basic moral principles. Priests throughout medieval England face similar crises when noble patrons demand religious support for activities that church doctrine condemns, creating systematic corruption that weakens religious authority throughout society. The servant testimonies collectively reveal that your wife's adultery has created moral crisis throughout your entire household, forcing people who depend on your family for survival to participate in activities that violate their deepest convictions about marriage, honor, and religious duty. The elaborate conspiracy required to maintain her affair has corrupted dozens of people who would prefer to live according to traditional moral principles but lack economic alternatives that would allow them to refuse participation in systematic deception. Standing in the castle's lower levels, surrounded by people whose livelihoods depend on your decisions, while their moral integrity has been compromised by your wife's choices, you realize that adultery's damage extends far beyond the immediate family to poison relationships throughout the entire social structure that supports noble households. The romantic adventures that seem so personal and private actually corrupt entire communities whose members become unwilling accomplices to behavior that violates everything they believe about right and wrong. In the pre-dawn darkness, you make your way to the castle chapel, seeking spiritual guidance that might clarify your options while confronting the Church's conflicted relationship with noble adultery. Kneeling before the altar, where you and your wife exchanged sacred vows 12 years ago, you wrestle with religious teachings that condemn adultery while simultaneously creating cultural frameworks that make such betrayals almost inevitable. Father Benedict's reluctant presence beside you in the empty chapel represents the impossible position that medieval priests occupy when serving noble families whose behavior systematically violates church doctrine. His whispered confession reveals years of moral compromise that began long before your wife's affair became active, as he provided religious counsel that gradually normalized adultery by treating romantic love as spiritual quest rather than sinful rebellion against divine law. The Church's official teaching presents clear condemnation of adultery as mortal sin that threatens eternal salvation, yet the same institution has created and promotes cultural traditions that celebrate romantic love in ways that make extramarital relationships appear noble rather than sinful. The cult of courtly love, with its elaborate religious imagery and quasi-mystical devotion to feminine beauty, provides spiritual language for describing adultery that transforms sin into sacrament. Your wife's collection of religious manuscripts reveals systematic theological justification for romantic relationships that transcend marriage bonds, drawing on mystical traditions that present earthly love as preparation for divine union. These texts, approved by church authorities and widely circulated throughout noble culture, argue that passionate love between souls destined for each other represents God's will, even when human law forbids such unions through marriage arrangements. The Church's elevation of the Virgin Mary as romantic ideal has created theological framework that encourages masculine devotion to feminine beauty, while simultaneously demanding feminine purity that actual women cannot maintain. Noble ladies find themselves expected to inspire romantic devotion while remaining sexually unavailable, creating psychological pressures that make adultery appear as natural rebellion against impossible expectations rather than moral failure. Father Benedict's theological training, completed at the University of Paris under teachers who emphasized Aristotelian philosophy and scholastic reasoning, provided him with intellectual tools for justifying almost any behavior through sophisticated argumentation. His ability to find religious precedents for romantic love that violates marriage vows demonstrates how advanced theological education can be misused to support conclusions that contradict basic moral intuition and biblical teaching. The Church's practical dependence on noble patronage creates systematic bias toward accommodating aristocratic behavior that would receive harsh condemnation if practiced by peasants or merchants. Your family's generous donations to religious institutions, funding of monastery construction, and support for clerical education creates financial obligations that influence religious authorities to provide favorable interpretations of moral law when your wife's behavior requires spiritual justification. The sacramental system that should provide clear guidance about marriage and adultery has been complicated by theological developments that blur distinctions between spiritual and physical love, creating confusion about whether romantic passion represents divine inspiration or demonic temptation. The same mystical traditions that enrich authentic religious experience also provide vocabulary for describing adultery in terms that make sin appear as pathway to salvation rather than rebellion against divine will. Your wife's religious education, supervised by nuns who emphasized mystical devotion and romantic spirituality, prepared her to view intense emotional relationships as religious experiences rather than potential moral dangers. Her prayers increasingly focus on personal fulfillment and spiritual growth through love rather than duty, obedience, and self-sacrifice that traditional marriage requires, suggesting systematic theological preparation for adultery disguised as religious sophistication. The Church's legal system provides mechanisms for marriage annulment that create perverse incentives for adultery by offering potential escape from unwanted unions for people with sufficient wealth and political influence. Your wife may view her affair as preliminary step toward securing annulment based on coercion, non-consummation, or other grounds that canonical lawyers can construct if provided with adequate financial motivation and political pressure. The religious calendar that should reinforce marriage stability actually provides systematic opportunities for romantic encounters disguised as spiritual observances, with pilgrimages, religious festivals, and devotional practices creating perfect cover for adultery while providing religious justification for behaviors that violate marital obligations. Your wife's increased religious activity over the past year likely represents systematic preparation for conducting affair under spiritual camouflage. The Church's treatment of confession as sacrament that provides forgiveness for any sin, regardless of intention to reform behavior, creates moral framework that enables systematic adultery by offering easy absolution for people who plan to continue sinful activities while maintaining good standing with religious authorities. Your wife may be confessing her adultery regularly while having no intention of ending the relationship that provides her primary emotional satisfaction. Father Benedict's role as spiritual director for both you and your wife creates impossible conflicts of interest, as he must provide religious counsel to marriage partners whose interests have become fundamentally opposed, while maintaining confidentiality about information that affects both parties. His knowledge of your wife's adultery places him in position where any advice he provides necessarily involves betrayal of one spouse or the other. The Church's emphasis on celibacy for clergy creates systematic ignorance about marriage and sexuality that renders priests incompetent to provide practical guidance about romantic relationships and marital problems. Father Benedict's theoretical knowledge about love and marriage, derived entirely from theological study rather than personal experience, makes his counsel worse than useless when dealing with real human relationships and their emotional complexities. The religious art and literature that decorates your chapel tells stories of saints and martyrs whose spiritual achievements often involved rejection of marriage and family obligations in favour of higher religious calling, providing cultural precedents for viewing marital duties as obstacles to authentic spiritual development rather than sacred obligations. Your wife may view her affair as spiritual liberation rather than moral corruption. Standing before the altar where you promised fidelity 12 years ago, you realize that the Church has created theological environment that makes adultery appear spiritually justifiable while maintaining legal and social structures that punish such behavior when it becomes public. The religious institution that should provide moral clarity has instead created systematic confusion that enables sin while avoiding responsibility for its consequences. As the first hints of dawn creep through your solar windows, you spread the household account books across your oak table, forcing yourself to calculate the complete financial devastation that your wife's adultery has inflicted on your family's accumulated wealth and future security. The numbers tell a story of systematic betrayal that extends far beyond emotional infidelity to constitute wholesale theft of generational resources. Your wife's expenditures on romantic gifts for Geoffrey over the past 18 months total more than 300 marks, a sum that represents nearly half your annual income from all sources and exceeds the dowries of most noble daughters throughout England. Each item in this devastating inventory represents not just personal betrayal, but strategic weakness that will limit your political and military effectiveness for decades to come. The jewelry alone accounts for 60 marks of family treasure converted to romantic tokens, including heirloom pieces inherited from your grandmother whose religious significance made them irreplaceable. Your wife has essentially sold your family's spiritual protection to purchase temporary romantic satisfaction, trading blessed objects that provided divine favor for secular gifts that served only physical pleasure. The textile expenditures reveal systematic effort to transform your wife's appearance for Geoffrey's benefit, with silk imports from Constantinople, fine woolens from Flanders, and exotic furs from northern territories, creating wardrobe expansion that costs more than most knights spend on military equipment. Your wife has been dressing for her lover with more care and expense than she ever invested in maintaining your household's dignity or her own wifely obligations. Your stable accounts show the most personally insulting losses, as horses worth over 100 marks have been gifted to Geoffrey, along with elaborate tack and harnesses crafted by the finest leatherworkers in England. These destriers, bred specifically for your military service and trained for battlefield conditions, now serve your enemy while leaving your own military capabilities diminished and your defensive preparations compromised. The wine cellar inventory reveals consumption patterns that mock every sacred occasion, while depleting stores accumulated over decades of careful purchasing and storage. Vintages reserved for royal visits, religious celebrations, and family milestones have been consumed in private romantic encounters that transformed religious festivals into occasions for adultery rather than spiritual observance. Your wife's charitable donations to monasteries and religious houses in Geoffrey's name represent another layer of financial betrayal, as funds intended for your family's spiritual welfare have been redirected to purchase prayer and religious merit for your enemy. Your eternal salvation has been compromised to enhance Geoffrey's relationship with God, while your own soul receives no benefit from resources earned through your labor and sacrifice. The guest chamber renovations that facilitated romantic encounters cost more than some lords spend on castle fortifications, with imported furniture, luxury bedding, and artistic decorations, creating romantic settings that surpass even royal accommodations. Your castle has been converted into elaborate brothel using resources that should have enhanced your family's long-term security and political standing. Your daughter's dowry fund, carefully accumulated over 16 years through systematic saving and investment, has been reduced by nearly 2/3 through your wife's romantic expenditures. Margaret's marriage prospects will be severely limited because her mother prioritized immediate romantic gratification over her daughter's future security and happiness. The agricultural improvement funds, intended for field drainage, mill construction, and livestock breeding that would benefit your estate's productivity for generations, have been diverted to support elaborate romantic entertainments that provided no lasting value while depleting resources needed for long-term economic development. Your political influence, dependent on your ability to provide appropriate hospitality and gift-giving to maintain relationships with other noble families, has been systematically undermined by expenditures that benefited your enemy while reducing your capacity to fulfill social obligations that maintain your position in regional power structures. The Military Equipment Fund, essential for maintaining combat readiness and fulfilling feudal obligations to provide properly equipped knights for royal service, has been compromised by romantic expenditures that actually enhanced your rival's military capabilities while weakening your own defensive preparations. Your son's education funds, intended to secure proper knightly training and university study that would prepare them for successful careers have been depleted to support romantic adventures that provide no benefit to future generations while limiting their opportunities for advancement through appropriate preparation and social connections. The household maintenance budget necessary for castle repairs, servant wages, and basic operational expenses has been strained by romantic expenditures that diverted resources from essential maintenance, while creating financial pressures that threaten your ability to maintain your estate's basic functions. Your trade investments, carefully developed over years to provide alternative income sources that would reduce dependence on agricultural revenues, have been liquidated to fund romantic expenses that provided no economic return, while eliminating diversified revenue streams that took decades to establish. The emergency reserves, accumulated to provide security during military campaigns, harvest failures, and political crises, have been systematically depleted to fund romantic luxuries, leaving your family vulnerable to disasters that prudent financial management should have prepared you to survive. Your wife's systematic financial betrayal extends beyond theft to constitute strategic assault on everything you've worked to build and preserve, designed to enhance your enemy's capabilities while destroying your own resources and future prospects. The romantic adventure that seemed so personal and private has actually functioned as economic warfare that weakened your position while strengthening Jeffrey's St. Standing in your solar, surrounded by account books that document systematic destruction of your family's financial security, you realize that recovery will require decades of careful management and probably permanent reduction in your lifestyle and political influence. Your wife's romantic choices have impoverished your children, compromised your military effectiveness, and destroyed the economic foundation that supported your family's social position for generations. As dawn breaks over your castle walls, you analyze your wife's adultery through the strategic lens that military campaigns have taught you to apply to all threats. The betrayal extends far beyond personal humiliation to constitute systematic assault on your political position, military effectiveness, and regional influence that could destabilize carefully constructed alliances and render you vulnerable to enemies who have been waiting for exactly such weakness to exploit. Jeffrey's access to your household has provided him with intelligence about your military preparations, political alliances, and strategic planning that transforms him from romantic rival into potential military enemy, with detailed knowledge of your defensive capabilities and tactical preferences. Your wife's lover has been conducting reconnaissance within your own castle walls while you focused on external threats, giving him advantages that no siege could provide. Your political relationships with neighbouring lords face systematic damage as news of your wife's adultery spreads through the network of noble gossip that connects every castle in England. The reputation for effective household management and personal honour that underwrites your political influence will collapse when other nobles learn that you cannot control your own wife or protect your own marriage bed from invasion by ambitious knights. The marriage alliances that form the foundation of medieval political networks become vulnerable when adultery threatens the legitimacy and stability that make such arrangements valuable to other families. Your daughter's betrothal, your son's intended marriage, and various kinship connections developed over decades could dissolve as other nobles distance themselves from scandal that might contaminate their own reputations. Your military obligations to provide knight service for royal campaigns face potential compromise because the financial resources and political relationships necessary to maintain properly equipped forces have been damaged by your wife's systematic expenditures on romantic adventures. The king expects reliable service from vassals who demonstrate effective leadership and stable household management, not from lords whose wives conduct public affairs with enemy knights. Your regional influence, built through careful cultivation of relationships with abbots, bishops, merchants, and lesser nobles throughout your territory, could collapse if adultery scandal undermines the moral authority that makes your leadership acceptable to subordinates who expect their superiors to embody the virtues they promote. Medieval lordship depends on personal example as much as formal authority. The intelligence networks that keep you informed about regional developments and potential threats have been compromised by your wife's affair. As servants and retainers, whose loyalty should be absolute, have demonstrated their willingness to participate in systematic deception when properly motivated. Your ability to gather reliable information about enemy activities becomes questionable when your own household contains proven conspirators. Your castle's defensive preparations face evaluation in light of security breaches that enabled Geoffrey's secret visits and extended stays without detection by guards or watchmen supposedly responsible for monitoring all access to your family's private quarters. Military fortifications provide no protection against enemies who gain admission through domestic betrayal rather than external assault. The feudal obligations that bind your vassals and dependents to provide military service and political support rest on mutual loyalty and trust that your wife's adultery has systematically violated. Knights who swore personal loyalty to your family may question their obligations when your own wife demonstrates that such bonds mean nothing when personal desires conflict with formal commitments. Your relationship with the Church, crucial for maintaining political legitimacy and spiritual authority over your territory, faces potential damage if adultery scandal forces religious authorities to distance themselves from your family to avoid contamination by association with public moral failure. Bishops and abbots who depend on royal and papal approval cannot maintain close relationships with nobles whose behaviour threatens church teaching. The trade relationships that provide essential economic support for your military and political activities could suffer if merchants and craftsmen lose confidence in your ability to maintain stable household management and reliable payment systems. Medieval commerce depends on personal trust and reputation for honouring agreements, both of which suffer when domestic chaos suggests fundamental unreliability. Your son's future military careers face potential obstacles if adultery scandal damages your family name in ways that make them less attractive as companions, lieutenants, and marriage partners for other noble families seeking reliable allies. Medieval military culture emphasizes personal honor and family reputation as qualifications for advancement and leadership positions. Your intelligence about Geoffrey's military capabilities, political connections, and strategic planning has been systematically compromised because your wife has been providing him with detailed information about your activities while gaining access to his plans and preparations. The affair has created intelligence sharing that benefits your potential enemy while exposing your own vulnerabilities to exploitation. Your ability to form new political alliances faces permanent damage if adultery scandal creates reputation for weak leadership and poor judgment that makes other nobles reluctant to enter into agreements requiring trust and mutual support. Medieval politics operates through personal relationships that depend on confidence in each partner's reliability and effectiveness. The regional balance of power that has maintained stability throughout your territory could shift dramatically if your political weakness encourages ambitious neighbours to challenge your authority or form alliances against you. Medieval politics abhors weakness, and your wife's adultery signals vulnerability that other nobles may see as opportunity for territorial expansion or political advancement. Your participation in royal court activities, essential for maintaining political influence and staying informed about national developments, could be limited if scandal makes your presence embarrassing for the king or inconvenient for other courtiers who prefer to avoid association with domestic failure that reflects poorly on their own judgment and associations. Standing on your castle's battlements as dawn light reveals the territory you fought to protect and govern, you realize that your wife's betrayal has created military and political crisis that extends far beyond personal emotional damage to threaten everything you've built through decades of careful strategy and battlefield. Service. The romantic adventure that seems so private and personal has actually constituted systematic warfare against your position and influence. Your investigation into your wife's adultery reveals that her affair with Geoffrey represents not isolated moral failure, but systematic pattern of extramarital relationships throughout noble society that creates networks of romantic, intrigue rivaling diplomatic alliances in their complexity and political significance. The discovery forces you to reassess your understanding of marriage, loyalty, and social relationships throughout medieval aristocratic culture. Sir Edmund of Cornwall, whom you considered among your most trustworthy allies, maintains well-known relationships with Lady Catherine de Beaumont and Lady Isabel of Gloucester simultaneously, managing parallel romantic affairs that involve elaborate gift exchanges, secret correspondence, and regular trysts arranged through servant networks that span 3 counties. His romantic adventures represent systematic investment in political relationships that complement rather than compete with his formal diplomatic activities. Lady Catherine's husband, Lord William de Beaumont, demonstrates complete awareness of his wife's affairs while maintaining his own romantic relationships with the merchant's daughter in London and Lady Margaret of Winchester, creating household arrangements that accommodate multiple adultery networks through carefully negotiated agreements that preserve appearances while acknowledging reality. Your investigation reveals that these romantic networks serve political functions that extend beyond personal gratification to include intelligence gathering, alliance building, and influence trading that operates parallel to formal diplomatic channels. Lady Isabel's affair with Sir Edmund provides her husband with access to Cornwall family intelligence, while giving Edmund information about Gloucester political planning that benefits his own territorial ambitions. The seasonal cycle of tournaments, religious festivals, and court gatherings creates predictable opportunities for romantic network maintenance, with elaborate social calendars designed as much for facilitating adultery as for providing legitimate entertainment and political interaction. The Christmas court that brought Geoffrey to your castle was actually a coordinated romantic summit involving multiple affairs that required complex logistical arrangements. Your wife's romantic correspondence reveals connections to continental adultery networks that span France, Normandy, and Aquitaine, with systematic exchange of romantic intelligence, introduction services for travelling nobles seeking discreet encounters, and coordination of elaborate deceptions that enable international affairs during diplomatic missions and military campaigns. The troubadour culture that Eleanor of Aquitaine established has created professional infrastructure for adultery networks, with poets, musicians, and entertainers serving as message carriers, intelligence coordinators, and romantic brokers who facilitate introductions between compatible partners while maintaining the literary pretense that justifies their activities as cultural refinement rather than systematic procuration. Your own social circle, when examined through this new understanding, reveals romantic relationships that explain political alliances, military cooperation, and economic partnerships that previously seemed based purely on strategic calculation. Lord Robert's unusual generosity towards Sir Geoffrey's family makes perfect sense when viewed as payment for Geoffrey's romantic services to Lady Anne, Robert's wife, whose documented unhappiness with her arranged marriage created opportunities that Geoffrey has been exploiting for years. The hunting parties, tournaments, and military exercises that structure noble social life serve dual purposes as legitimate entertainment and systematic cover for romantic encounters, with elaborate protocols that ensure participating nobles can pursue their affairs while maintaining plausible denial about activities that would create scandal if conducted openly. Your wife's enthusiasm for hosting such gatherings now appears as strategic investment in adultery infrastructure rather than mere social ambition. The servant networks that enable these romantic relationships operate with efficiency that surpasses many commercial enterprises, with specialized roles, professional standards, and compensation systems that make adultery facilitation a recognized, though unofficial, occupation within noble households. Margaret's skills as romantic coordinator represent marketable talents that could secure her employment throughout England if your household dissolves. Your analysis reveals that noble adultery operates according to informal but well-established rules that govern territory, precedence, and reciprocity among participating families, with violations of romantic etiquette creating conflicts that can escalate into actual warfare when territorial boundaries are violated or exclusive relationships are poached by competitors. Geoffrey's pursuit of your wife may have violated agreements with other lords who considered her off-limits due to prior claims or territorial arrangements. The economic infrastructure supporting these adultery networks rivals legitimate trade relationships, with systematic exchange of gifts, services, and information that creates parallel economy operating alongside official commercial activities. The merchants, craftsmen, and service providers who cater to romantic needs have developed specialized markets that depend on adultery's continuation for their economic survival. Your wife's affair connects her to influential women throughout England who share information about romantic opportunities, provide introductions to eligible knights, and coordinate elaborate deceptions that enable simultaneous management of multiple relationships. Lady Eleanor of Winchester serves as informal coordinator for romantic activities throughout southern England, maintaining detailed intelligence about available partners, ongoing relationships, and potential complications. The religious institutions that should oppose adultery have been systematically co-opted to provide spiritual justification and practical support for romantic networks, with monasteries serving as message centers, convents providing safe houses for romantic encounters, and individual priests offering theological frameworks that transform sin into spiritual quest. The Church has become unwitting infrastructure for systematic adultery rather than moral authority opposing such behavior. Your investigation reveals that the marriage system itself has evolved to accommodate adultery networks while maintaining legal and social structures that preserve property relationships and inheritance rights. Successful noble marriages increasingly depend on spouses' ability to manage their extramarital relationships without creating public scandal rather than on fidelity or emotional commitment to each other. The training that prepares noble children for adult life includes informal education about romantic network participation with older relatives and family friends, providing guidance about conducting affairs safely while maintaining marriage stability. Your daughter may already be receiving instruction about managing future romantic relationships that will complement rather than threaten her intended marriage arrangements. The judicial systems that supposedly enforce marriage law have been compromised by widespread participation in adultery networks among judges, lawyers, and court officials whose own romantic relationships create conflicts of interest when handling cases involving infidelity. Justice becomes impossible when legal authorities are themselves systematically violating the laws they're supposed to enforce. Your recognition of these broader patterns forces fundamental reassessment of medieval marriage as social institution, revealing that formal marriage serves primarily economic and political functions, while emotional and sexual needs are met through parallel systems that operate with tacit social acceptance, despite official moral condemnation. Your wife's adultery represents participation in established cultural patterns rather than innovative personal rebellion. The romantic literature that celebrates courtly love actually functions as instruction manual for adultery network participation, providing coded language, behavioral models, and cultural justification for activities that formal moral teaching condemns. The books in your wife's collection serve as professional development materials rather than mere entertainment. Standing in your great hall, surrounded by evidence of systematic adultery networks that encompass your entire social world, you realize that your marriage crisis represents collision between your personal expectations of fidelity and cultural reality that makes such expectations impossible to fulfill. The choice facing you involves not simply punishing your wife's betrayal, but deciding whether to join or oppose social systems that have made adultery integral to noble culture throughout medieval Europe. The morning sun now streams fully through your solar windows as you reach the moment of decision that will determine not only your response to your wife's betrayal, but your family's future within the complex web of medieval noble society. Every option available carries devastating consequences, and wisdom lies not in finding perfect solutions, but in choosing among necessary evils, while preserving what can be saved from the wreckage of your marriage. Public confrontation and formal accusations through church courts would restore your wounded honor while destroying everything else you've worked to build. Proving your wife's adultery would grant you annulment, forfeit her dower rights, and potentially justify Geoffrey's execution, but the scandal would make your children unmarriageable, dissolve your political alliances, and reduce your family to social pariahs, shunned by former friends who cannot afford association with public moral failure. Private arrangements that acknowledge your wife's affair while maintaining public appearances offer stability at the cost of personal dignity, creating household agreements that accommodate her romantic needs while preserving family unity and social standing. Such arrangements require negotiating complex protocols that regulate Geoffrey's access, establish boundaries for romantic activities, and maintain fiction of marital harmony that protects your children while sacrificing your emotional satisfaction. Violent resolution through challenge, duel, or arranged assassination would satisfy masculine honor codes while creating blood feuds that could destroy your family through generations of warfare and vengeance. Geoffrey's death might restore your reputation temporarily, but his family's retaliation could escalate into regional conflict that devastates everything you've built while solving none of the fundamental problems that made your wife's adultery almost inevitable. Strategic manipulation of the situation for political advantage represents the most complex but potentially rewarding response. Using knowledge of your wife's affair and Jeffrey's vulnerability to extract concessions, secure alliances, and gain leverage over enemies while maintaining public ignorance about activities that could benefit your family if properly managed rather than simply punished. Your wife's reaction to discovery will largely determine which options remain viable, as her willingness to end the affair, accept restrictions, or cooperate with face-saving arrangements affects every possible resolution strategy. Her romantic attachment to Jeffrey may have progressed beyond rational calculation, making negotiated settlements impossible if she prioritizes emotional satisfaction over family welfare and social survival. Jeffrey's response to confrontation will influence whether peaceful resolution remains possible or whether conflict becomes inevitable, as his assessment of risks and benefits determines his willingness to withdraw gracefully, fight for continued access, or escalate the situation through political or military action. His romantic investment may be less significant than his strategic evaluation of opportunities your family crisis creates. Your children's welfare must take precedence over personal satisfaction when evaluating response options, as their future happiness and success depend on decisions that minimize scandal while preserving their inheritance rights and marriage prospects. Their innocence deserves protection even when adult failures create situations that make perfect solutions impossible to achieve. Your household's loyalty and effectiveness will be permanently affected by whatever resolution strategy you choose, as servants and retainers who participated in your wife's deception must either be punished severely enough to deter future betrayals or forgiven completely enough to restore functional working relationships. Half measures will satisfy no one while creating ongoing instability. Your political position within regional noble networks requires careful consideration when choosing response strategies, as other lords will evaluate your handling of this crisis as measure of your leadership capabilities and strategic wisdom. Weakness invites aggression, while excessive harshness suggests instability that makes you unreliable ally and dangerous enemy. The Church's involvement in whatever resolution you pursue will affect your family's spiritual welfare and social standing, as religious authorities must either provide theological justification for your chosen response or maintain moral opposition that complicates future relationships with ecclesiastical institutions. Father Benedict's complicity in your wife's affair creates opportunities for manipulation while limiting his ability to provide genuine spiritual guidance. Your financial resources, already depleted by your wife's romantic expenditures, limit the options available for managing this crisis, as some resolution strategies require substantial expenditures for legal proceedings, political bribes, or household reorganization that your current economic situation cannot support without further compromising your family's long-term security. The seasonal timing of your decision affects its implementation and consequences, as winter weather limits travel and communication while providing more privacy for discreet negotiations, but also concentrates social activity within smaller circles where secrets become harder to maintain and gossip spreads more rapidly through confined, noble society. Your military obligations and political commitments create external pressures that influence available response strategies, as royal service requirements and feudal duties prevent extended focus on domestic problems while demanding maintenance of public competence and reliability that personal crisis might otherwise compromise. The broader patterns of adultery throughout noble society provide both context for understanding your situation and guidance for choosing responses that acknowledge cultural reality while protecting your family's interests. Joining adultery networks might offer more practical benefits than opposing systems that have proved stronger than individual resistance. Your age and health considerations affect the long-term viability of different resolution strategies, as responses requiring sustained conflict, elaborate deception, or major lifestyle changes demand energy and resilience that may exceed your current capabilities while creating burdens that could prove unsustainable over time. The historical precedents set by other nobles who faced similar crises provide models for evaluation, though each situation's unique circumstances limit the applicability of past solutions to current problems. Some approaches that succeeded for other families might fail disastrously when applied to your specific political and social situation. Standing in your solar, surrounded by evidence of systematic betrayal, while dawn light illuminates the territory you've spent your life defending and building, you realize that this decision will define not only your response to personal crisis, but your family's trajectory for generations to come. The romantic adventure that began as private pleasure has become public challenge that demands strategic response worthy of the military and political skills you've developed through decades of successful leadership. Your breathing slows as you feel the weight of decision settling upon your shoulders, like familiar armor, preparing you for whatever battle lies ahead. The castle around you grows quiet as morning activities begin in the distance, and you sense the approach of that comfortable heaviness that comes with acceptance of difficult truths and necessary choices. Your eyelids grow heavy as you sink deeper into the strategic contemplation that will determine your family's fate, letting the complexities of medieval noble life fade into the peaceful darkness where all decisions await the dreamer's wisdom.